Friedrich smiled, a little. John Brown, the man mentioned in Frederick Douglass' letter to Harriet Tubman, a name almost unknown to most Americans, although he was the frontrunner of some of the most important moments in the 19th century. Brown's name was lost to history until 2020 when there was a mini-series about him named The Good Lord Bird, but it did him just a little justice, for they showed him as a crazy man, a Bible fanatic. Like you have to be crazy to see the injustice of a race of people. Let me tell you, his ties to slavery not only led him into nonviolent resistance but to active, violent terrorism, which would cause many deaths and lead up to the Civil War. At 12, Brown recalls watching a black boy being beaten by a man with an iron shovel right in front of him. An everyday incident in America profoundly affected Brown's attitude toward slavery throughout his entire life. As he grew up and had a family, he always kept his disgust with slavery, but it had to take a tragedy to put his wheels in motion. Elijah Parrish Lovejoy was also an outspoken opponent of slavery, which his community met with intense hostility. He was sent death threats, his offices were attacked, and eventually, he was gunned down and killed. The slaying of Lovejoy disgusted John Brown, and he vowed to work for the rest of his life to carry on Lovejoy's work and oversee the abolition of slavery. A difficult task for Brown because he was broke and, on top of that, had health problems that had plagued his family. Yet, he would not give up and made his way to Boston to join the anti-slavery crusade. Brown and his family arrived in Boston when the city was transforming into a central hub of anti-slavery activity. Mind you, Boston was one place that dealt with and was famous for slave farms. Wanyenyekevu said. Yes, I'm aware of that, and it produced the word motherfucker from that event, for slaves were forced to have sex with their children to produce better so-called stock like they do with bulls and horses. Friedrich said. We will have to talk in depth on that, I didn't know all that. I knew about the slave farm, but didn't know that part. He shook his head with disappointment, damn. Anyway, Brown immediately threw himself into the organization and became a crucial figure in the running of the famous Underground Railroad. The government deemed the Underground Railroad deeply subversive. It led to the establishment of the Fugitive Slave Act, which permitted bounty hunters to capture slaves and return them to their so-called masters, and some were, well, you know. In response, Brown turned away from nonviolent action and established a vigilante group known as the League of Gileadites to protect slaves from being captured. While Brown's activities were primarily nonviolent, at first, this changed when pro-slavery forces invaded Kansas, where his sons lived. The violence during this period was the intense, but brutal beating of the anti-slavery Senator Charles Sumner. Brown was not forgiving and retaliated. Brown and his comrades murdered 5 of the men 2 days after the beating, which caused brutal violence. During this, one of his sons was killed. After seeing the death of his son, it is not clear how many pro-slavery men were killed by Brown, but his willingness to use violence spread throughout the United States, for some hailed him as a hero and others as a dangerous terrorist. Over the next few years, Brown's violent activities would escalate. He gathered a force of 22 vigilantes and attacked Harper's Ferry, which contained an armory. The tension of the vigilante group was to seize the weapons and spark a revolution that would lead to the abolition of slavery by force. However, the U.S. Marines attacked the vigilantes, and many of Brown's allies and 2 more of his sons were killed. Brown refused to surrender, saying he would rather die than give up to the soldiers. He was knocked unconscious, arrested, and sent to prison. They charged and sentenced him to death. The court held him in total contempt, saying, Wanyenyekevu interrupted Friedrich, had I so interfered with the rich, the powerful, the intelligent, the great or on behalf of any of their friends, it would have been all right, and every man would have thought it worthy of reward rather than punishment. Wanyenyekevu continued, they hung him to death in Virginia. He was 59. After his death, the Civil War broke out in the United States, leading to the abolition of slavery. Yes, I have definitely heard of John Brown, but I didn't know all that.